The town of Briarwood had always been a quiet place. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, it was the kind of town where people left their doors unlocked and everyone knew each other by name. That's why, when Lena Matthews, a 17-year-old waitress at the Rusty Spoon Diner, vanished without a trace, it shook the community to its core. She had just finished her shift at 10:30 p.m., waved goodbye to her coworkers, and stepped out onto the dimly lit street. It was a 5-minute walk home. But she never made it. Her cell phone was found the next morning in a ditch by the side of Riverbend Road, its screen cracked, its battery dead. One of her sneakers was discovered near a narrow hiking trail leading into the woods. Her jacket was draped over the wooden railing of the old bridge that crossed Briarwood Creek. But Lena herself? She was gone. The town's police force, led by Chief Darren Monroe, launched an immediate search. Volunteers combed the forest, drones scanned from above, and scent dogs traced her last known steps. But within 48 hours, the case took a chilling turn. There were no leads, no witnesses, no security footage. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. Detective Ethan Calloway, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving impossible cases, was brought in to assist. He had seen cases like this before. He knew that after the first 72 hours, the chances of finding a missing person dropped significantly. As he walked along Riverbend Road, retracing Lena's last steps, something felt off. The town had an uneasy silence, the kind that hides secrets. Then he met Arthur Green, the town's reclusive old man. "You were outside that night," Calloway said. "You must have seen something." Arthur's weathered face tensed. His gaze flickered toward the woods. "I saw her," he muttered. "She was running." Calloway's pulse quickened. "From who?" Arthur swallowed hard. "That's the thing, Detective. She wasn't running from someone. She was running toward something." Arthur Green had lived on the outskirts of Briarwood for over 40 years. He was the kind of man people whispered about, a recluse, a loner, a ghost of the past. Most dismissed him as a harmless old man, but when Lena Matthews vanished, he became the only person who might have seen what happened that night. Detective Ethan Calloway sat across from Arthur on the man's creaky front porch, the soft chirping of crickets filling the uneasy silence between them. The old man's hands trembled slightly as he lit a cigarette, his weathered eyes darting toward the tree line. "You were out here the night Lena went missing," Calloway said, keeping his tone measured. "You told me you saw her running." Arthur exhaled a long breath of smoke, nodding slowly. "Yeah. She was running." His voice was hoarse, as if the words themselves were too heavy to speak. Calloway leaned forward. "From who?" Arthur hesitated. He stared at the cigarette in his hand, his jaw tightening. "That's the thing, Detective," he muttered. "She wasn't running from someone. She was running toward something." The words sent a chill through Calloway's spine. "What do you mean?" Arthur's gaze lifted toward the dense woods beyond his property. "She ran into the forest like she was following something, like she saw something the rest of us couldn't." Calloway frowned. "Are you saying she wasn't being chased?" Arthur shook his head. "No, she was scared, real scared, but she wasn't just running away. She was running toward something out there." He crushed the cigarette into the ashtray beside him. "And then, just like that, she was gone. Vanished into those damn trees." Calloway studied the old man carefully. "You're holding something back." Arthur let out a hollow laugh. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." "Try me." Arthur's lips trembled. He lowered his voice to barely a whisper. "She wasn't alone." Calloway's pulse quickened. "Who was with her?" Arthur's eyes darkened. He looked toward the woods again. "Not who, Detective, what?" A heavy silence settled between them. For the first time since he arrived in Briarwood, Calloway realized this case was about more than just a missing girl. It was about something else, something people were too afraid to talk about. Detective Ethan Calloway sat in Briarwood's small, dimly lit public library, surrounded by stacks of old newspapers and missing persons reports. The scent of aged paper filled the air as the rain tapped softly against the windows. Arthur Green's words haunted him. She wasn't alone. If Lena Matthews had seen something in the woods that night, then maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. He flipped through the microfilm archives, searching for anything that stood out. Hours passed. Then, a headline froze his blood. Local girl disappears near Riverbend Road 20 years ago. The article was dated exactly 2 decades earlier. The missing girl's name was Hannah Grayson. She had vanished in the exact same area where Lena was last seen. No body was ever found. No suspects were named. The case was forgotten. Calloway's heart pounded. 2 disappearances, same location, 20 years apart. That was no coincidence. A sudden creak echoed through the empty library. Calloway looked up. A figure moved between the bookshelves. "Library closes soon," a voice said. It was the librarian, Mrs. Holloway, an elderly woman with piercing eyes. She peered at the newspaper in front of him and frowned. "You shouldn't be digging into that, Detective." Calloway raised an eyebrow. Why not? She hesitated, lowering her voice. "Because people who ask too many questions in Briarwood," she leaned in, "they tend to disappear." A cold shiver ran down Calloway's spine. "Did you know Hannah Grayson?" he asked. Mrs. Holloway hesitated, then nodded. "She was a sweet girl, and she knew something she wasn't supposed to." Calloway's pulse quickened. What did she know? The librarian looked toward the door nervously. "Not here," she whispered. "Meet me at St. Mary's Church tomorrow morning. I'll tell you what I remember." Calloway nodded, but deep down a sense of dread grew within him. Detective Ethan Calloway arrived at St. Mary's Church just as the sun peeked over the horizon, casting an eerie golden glow over the fog-covered graveyard. He expected to meet Mrs. Holloway, the librarian, but she never showed. Instead, he found her car parked outside the church, with the driver's door wide open. His stomach twisted. Another person vanished. The air was thick with unease as Calloway reached inside the car. A single library card rested on the passenger seat. On the back, scrawled in shaky handwriting, was an address: 142 Blackwood Lane. Calloway's instincts screamed at him to be cautious, but he had no choice. Someone was leading him there. The house on Blackwood Lane was an abandoned relic from another time, its wooden porch sagging, the windows dark and hollow. Ivy choked the walls, and the front door hung slightly open, as if waiting for him. He stepped inside. Dust and decay filled his lungs. The faint scent of old wood and something metallic lingered in the air. His flashlight beam danced across faded photographs on the walls, smiling families, now forgotten. Then he saw it. A picture of Hannah Grayson. The missing girl from 20 years ago. She stood next to another child, a young boy, his face half hidden in shadow. A floorboard creaked above him. Calloway's heart pounded as he unholstered his gun. Slowly, he ascended the stairs, stepping over tattered rugs and broken furniture. At the end of the hallway, a single door stood ajar. He pushed it open. The room was filled with newspaper clippings, all about missing persons in Briarwood. Red string connected faces, dates, and locations, all leading to one name: Mayor Richard Gates. Calloway's pulse hammered in his ears. The town's mayor had been in office for decades, respected, untouchable, but here, in this forgotten house, his name was linked to every disappearance. Then something else caught his eye, a single Polaroid on the desk. It was Lena Matthews, and she was still alive. Detective Ethan Calloway froze. The thud from downstairs was unmistakable. Someone, or something, was in the house with him. Slowly, he turned off his flashlight and pressed his back against the wall. The only sound was his own shallow breathing as he listened for movement. Then, another sound, a low creak, like a footstep on an old wooden floor. Someone knew he was here. Calloway moved cautiously, stepping back down the stairs, gun drawn. He swept his flashlight across the decayed living room. The front door remained ajar, the night air whispering through the broken windows. Then he noticed something new. A single set of muddy footprints leading from the door into the house, but none leading out. His grip tightened around his weapon. "Briarwood police," he called out. "If someone's here, step out now." Silence. Then, out of the darkness, a figure lunged at him. Calloway barely had time to react before a heavy force slammed him against the wall, knocking the wind from his lungs. His flashlight tumbled to the floor, rolling until it stopped at the feet of his attacker, a tall man in a dark coat, his face obscured by a mask. The man lunged again, but Calloway twisted, using the man's momentum to throw him into the coffee table, shattering it into splinters. The masked figure groaned but scrambled to his feet. Calloway raised his gun. "Don't move." The man hesitated, then hurled something at Calloway's face. A thick file bound with a leather strap smacked against his chest before the man turned and bolted through the front door. By the time Calloway reached the porch, the figure had disappeared into the night. Heart-pounding, he looked down at the file in his hands. The label on the front read, "Confidential property of Mayor Richard Gates." Calloway's blood ran cold. The mayor was involved. Flipping open the file, he scanned the contents. Lists of names, financial records, documents about the town's history, and a single recent photo of Lena Matthews. She was still alive, but for how long? Calloway clenched his jaw. It was time to confront the man running Briarwood. The mayor had secrets, and Calloway was about to expose them all. Detective Ethan Calloway stormed into Mayor Richard Gates' office, the heavy folder of incriminating documents clenched in his fist. The grand office reeked of wealth, mahogany shelves, an antique globe, and thick velvet curtains that blocked out the night. Behind the massive oak desk sat Gates himself, a man in his 60s with slick-backed silver hair and a composed, calculating gaze. "I was wondering when you'd come knocking," Gates said smoothly, sipping from a crystal glass of whiskey. "Go ahead, detective. Tell me what you think you've found." Calloway threw the folder onto the desk. "The truth!" Gates smirked. He flipped open the file and skimmed its contents. Missing persons reports, financial transactions, and a Polaroid of Lena Matthews. Very much alive, but visibly terrified. "Where is she?" Calloway demanded. Gates sighed, closing the file. "You're persistent, I'll give you that. But I doubt you fully understand the situation you've walked into." "I understand that girls have been going missing in this town for decades," Calloway snapped, "and every single case leads back to you." Gates stood, adjusting his cufflinks. "Detective, do you know why Briarwood has remained untouched by crime, by poverty, by the disasters that plague other small towns?" Calloway's jaw tightened. "Because you made a deal with the devil." Gates chuckled. "Not the devil, detective, something much older." Calloway's grip on his gun tightened. "Where is Lena?" Gates exhaled. I don't know." "Liar." A slow smile spread across the mayor's face. "No, detective, you don't understand. She escaped." The words sent a jolt through Calloway. "She was never meant to survive," Gates continued. "She was an offering. Just like Hannah Grayson was 20 years ago, just like so many before her." Calloway's stomach twisted. An offering to what? Gates finally met his eyes. "Something that lives beneath Briarwood, something that has kept this town thriving in exchange for blood." Thunder rumbled outside. Calloway had heard enough. He turned to leave, but Gates' voice stopped him.